It was called Pandemic Anxiety 101. And the whole idea was to try and find ways to understand that fear that we've been living with as a constant background hum throughout this year. And so she was explaining that we all actually have a part of our brain called the amygdala. It's a little almond-shaped part of the brain just behind the ear, apparently. And it's the part that leaps into action whenever it perceives anything that comes across as being a threat, anything that's dangerous. The amygdala springs into action and kind of sounds a klaxon, sounds an alarm. But as Imogen Wall was explaining, it's really a very ancient part of our brain. It's part of our kind of caveman brain. And it really developed during a time when the main threat that could be perceived was that if you're walking through the woods and you suddenly see a bear that wants to eat you. And so she says, really, the amygdala only has two settings. She calls them bear or no bear. So whenever we see something that comes across as a threat to us, there's a little part of our brain that is either going bear, 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 or no bear. So when the amygdala triggers that bear mode, you can actually feel the physical effect. You start to breathe faster, your muscles tense, you've got a burst of adrenaline. What your brain is doing is preparing you to react in that most primitive way to the perception of a threat, what we usually summarize as either fight or flight. And those are, of course, the logical reactions if the danger that's facing you is a bear that wants to eat you. But what do you do if the threat that you're facing is an invisible virus? You can't fight it or you can't run from it in that same way. It is a threat to everything that we know and everyone that we love. But the response, we're being encouraged almost to do exactly the opposite, to lock down and sit tight. So on the one hand, you've got your amygdala klaxoning, bear, bear, bear. And on the other hand, you're trying to do exactly the opposite of that old caveman brain fight or flight response. And so the result is that we've just got this soup of contradictory impulses sloshing around inside us, while also trying to deal with all of the changes and the uncertainty and the changing rules and the daily challenges of life in 2020. No wonder that there are some days where we just don't know whether we are coming or going. And especially because the amygdala releases such a burst of adrenaline sometimes, no wonder that our emotions are all over the place like a roller coaster. I can't be the only one who finds that some days at the minute you kind of feel like you're plittering along all right, but then there are other days where you just, for no apparent reason, you're just really irritable and angry.
Want to make up a tea?
Ah, no, I hate tea. It disgusts me. How dare you? Ah! Or other days where even the most stoical of us find that we're being very, very kind of emotional.
Want to make up a tea?
That you would make me a cup of tea? Oh, thank you. Or other days where just the constant seesaw of it all just leaves you completely exhausted.
Want to make up a tea?
So, a fearful heart. Can we just be honest and admit that that has just been our experience for so much of this year? And it might not be that sudden jolt of fear that you would get if you faced a bear in the woods. In fact, I more think of it in terms of, I'm just going to show you a little section of our garden here with one of my most hated things. Thankfully out of sight, out of mind for most of the time, but every time I go right down to the bottom of the garden and see it again, I just think, oh, it's a horrible thing, a big electric pylon sitting there. And when you get right up close beside it like this, it just constantly gives out this horrible kind of low humming noise. And to me, that's a little bit like this kind of, this fearful heart that we've been living with for the past year. It's not a sudden jag of fear like you would have if you suddenly encountered a bear in the woods, but it's a low background of just the anxiety and worry and fear being there all the time.